Our opening session today is presented by Ian Banner. He's the Director of Facilities Planning and University Architecture at the University of Mississippi, also known as Ole Miss. Ian was born in England and he came to the United States in 1984. He has professional and teaching experience, having worked in private practice from 1982 to 2002 and with the School of Architecture at Mississippi State University from 1987 to 1994. He received tenure and was named an associate professor in 1994. In 2005, Ian was appointed the Director of Facilities Planning at the University of Mississippi and retains the position of University Architect and Director of Sustainability. Ian's area of architectural expertise are in energy efficient design and construction, daylight, passive systems such as thermal buoyancy, stack effect ventilation, and environmental impact of building materials. He has written on architecture and the environment, indigenous houses in the Appalachians, natural lighting in overcast and clear sky regions, and humidity and ventilation of medieval buildings in Northern Europe. Now I'm going to turn it over to Ian.
I appreciate that. And good morning, everybody. And we're beginning to add to the all of our experience, which is interruptions by lovely small children, pets, people knocking on the door trying to deliver Amazon packages, and so all of these things that distract us as we try to get used to this COVID world of doing things from home and doing things electronically. What I'd like to do this morning is to, as the first person, there's a huge responsibility at 8 o'clock in the morning to be doing something like this, to try to keep everybody interested and engaged. Thanks for the introduction, Jennifer. I am the university architect here at the University of Mississippi. And one of the fun things, of the many fun things that I get to do every day, is to engage with civil engineers, not only from what we might think are the traditional areas that architects might work with civil engineers, but also I understand quite a few people here this morning that are into the traffic side of engineering and moving people around, and that's something that is very important to us here at the university, especially as we have been developing a master plan since about 2005 that has probably challenged some of the ways that we have traditionally done things, which is basically drive everywhere, drive into the classroom, drive into your office, drive to get a cup of coffee, and challenge those thoughts as to how we might decentralize. But first, here at the university, for those of you that may not know us, we are about an hour, just over an hour south of Memphis. There are, you can see Oxford to the right center of the slide, and I'll come back to this in a few minutes. But critically, you can see Sardis to the top of the slide, and then just at the bottom, creeping in at the bottom, is Enid. Those two reservoirs are very important, and we'll talk about those a little bit in a minute. Basically, I'm working in a small town. Just the university, 20,000 people, 200 buildings, over 7 million square feet, a police department, electrical department, water department, sewage treatment facility, 1,200 seat theatre, 65,000 seat football stadium, basketball arenas, baseball stadiums, etc., etc. Even an airport, admittedly not on this campus, but within 2 miles of the campus. And we sit on 826 acres of beautiful rolling countryside here in North Mississippi. 315 of those acres are wooded, and it's something that I take very seriously in terms of when we're looking for a building site. It's easy to think, well, there's some land over there, we can use that, but it's wooded land, and it's something that I think is my responsibility to try to preserve and to hand on to the next generation. Facilities planning, there's only 10 of us in the Office of Facilities Planning, three architects. and people with areas of expertise that range from civil engineering all the way to the technology that enables me to be able to sit here and talk to you this morning, because without their help, I certainly wouldn't have been able to have made contact. What I'm going to discuss this morning is a little bit about transportation on our campus, a little bit about the development of a master plan, a little bit about the engineering that goes with it, a little bit about the architecture that goes with it, the failures that go with it, because we do have them. And I think it's important to discuss your failures because we all have them, and that's where our ability to learn, I think, is the greatest. And then at the end, maybe a little indulgence into perhaps maybe a couple of the successes that we've had. And so going back to 1965, you can see that the university from the air was not a beautiful wooded campus at that time. In fact, trees were somewhat sparse, as you can see from this aerial. And then looking down, closing in a little bit more, a year later in '66, you can see that that again there are woodlands for sure, but evidenced, as you see in the top left-hand corner of the slide, Magnolia Plaza had only just been planted at that particular time, and those magnolias today are absolutely magnificent, and that forms a really the ridge, the topographical ridge which goes east to west across our campus, and it's that topographical ridge that has formed the I think it's informed the master planning of this campus over the years, and that was the importance of putting in the map of the local geography, because we'll discuss where the water goes in just a second. This is the first attempt of decentralizing, taking parking lots and turning them into people spaces. So let's go back a sec. There it is, and right in the middle of the slide, you see where the cars are parked. And you can see that there's a beginning of a formal axis on the diagonal going left to right up the screen. You can see that the bottom right is the library, and there's our library, and then you've got going up towards the parking lot, and then on the way up to Guyton Hall. And excuse me, and this is actually quite sensitive. I'll figure it out in a sec. But that was the first parking lot that some wise person, who I don't know who it was, decided that they would turn it into this, which is a people space. And so if I was to go to my chancellor today and recommend that we turn this into a parking lot, I think they'd run me out of town, because we've had a lot of pushback as we've tried to decentralize and to take parking lots in the center of campus, turn them into people places, people movement places in some cases, and try to move the parking to the outside. And this is the poster child for why that's a good idea. Because there it is in real life down on the ground. It's a wonderful place all year round, but particularly in the spring when there's nothing on the trees, and right in the heart of campus. And that's where people used to park cars. And that's why I was sort of joking about why people want to drive into their office and into their classrooms. And so when we analyze a little bit more deeply the natural systems and habitat that we have, you can see how much green there is on campus, and how much of the woodland is right in the heart of campus, the Lyceum Circle and the Grove. And when people talk about this university, Charlottesville, Virginia, you're talking about buildings. Other famous campuses, you're talking about buildings. This campus, you're talking about spaces. And so we have the Grove and we have the Circle. We have the Northwest Woodlands, which is the buffer between us and a very busy urban Jackson Avenue. And then bottom right, we have Bailey's Woods, and which we have Roanoke, which is Faulkner's house. It's in Roanoke. So we've got some historically important woodlands that I think we do well to protect. What we start to see when we look at the way that that water gets away from our campus is that the axis that I was talking about early on. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but there it is. That is the axis that I was talking about earlier on. It's all the way up from the circle through the Lyceum, the main library, and when I get used to handling this, I apologise. You start to see that the water drops off to the south and it drops off to the north. When you look at that in the wider context, going back to our large slide from the air, you realise that Highway 278 that goes left to right across the screen really is the watershed line. That's the high point. That's what formed the main axis on campus. And as somebody told me when I first came to work here, every raindrop that falls north of that line goes to Sardis, and every raindrop that falls south of that line finishes up in Enid. And so, back again to that slide, you can see that all those tributaries, those streams make their way to the south, they make their way to the north, and there's not a whole lot on the ridge in the centre. And that's something that's informed the way that we have populated our campus and the way that we continue to do that in our long-term planning. So, coming on board around about 2005, we realised that I realised that we had master plans in the past. Frederick Law Olmsted's family and sons had carried on the practice, and they were working here at the university. So we have them to thank for a lot of the seeds that they planted early on, and that we've continued to develop. Movement was critical. We started with a master plan. We started knowing that we had to get people around this campus not only safely but conveniently. And if I was going to tell anybody that we had to look at decentralized parking lots, which, as we've seen earlier in the earlier slides, have been successful, it must not be a punitive thing. So we can't be saying to the students, you're going to suffer. You're going to have to walk 10 minutes. My goodness, who would have thought 18-year-olds could walk for 10 minutes? But we are not going to do that. We're going to put you out on the edge of campus, but it's not going to be inconvenient because we're going to supplement that with cycling, with buses, with an on-campus transportation system. At the same time, the master plan has to consider hardscape and softscapes, building on previously developed sites if we can, minimize our parking impact by trying to put vehicles on top of vehicles in multi-level parking structures, preserving the woodlands. And the two that I put in red there at the bottom, I wanted to highlight those because, you know, I said earlier, learning from your failures. We haven't done very well in terms of harvesting rainwater, and we haven't done very well yet in reusing treated water. They're still on my list of goals to try to be accomplished. And I can talk a little bit about how much condensation we generate on a daily basis a little bit later on in the presentation. But early on in our master plan, we got with Sasaki Associates out of Watertown, Massachusetts, and Greg Havens, who I still work with today. And they seemed to be, of all the people that we interviewed, the ones that were most tuned in to what it was we were trying to achieve. And you can read the four main tenets of the plan. You don't need me to read them to you, but they are the basis of where we started out in 2007 and where we are still today. I was so naive when we started doing this because I thought that you could break a master plan into 5-year increments, and that it was sort of a linear process, and that you'd have a 5-year plan, then you wait, you come in 5 years later, you adopt another plan, you probably evolve the one you've got. And I thought it was a clean process. It's not a clean process at all. It's blurred at the edges. And for this presentation today, I found it very difficult to say when our 2007 to 2012 master plan was, our 2012 to 2017, 2017 to 2022. It doesn't work like that. and it took me a while to figure that out. But what we did do, and what you can see from this slide, is that we started to evaluate buildings on campus that were valuable, buildings on campus that were under construction. We put in the hatched. There's the law school right there that was under construction at the time this was done. It was being planned. That's where we have our old basketball facility, which we'll talk about that in just a second. But the new buildings that we knew that we wanted to build, we placed in red. And critically, from our transportation point of view, we wanted to put parking structures on the outside. So we start to see that the parking structures occur here. We finished up with another one here. And what it's doing, I'm sorry guys, it's picking up on the heat from my fingers, and it's actually changing the slide. So I'll apologize for that. But as we developed that, we figured the heart of our campus was ripe for developing a pedestrian priority zone. It's right where all of the center of campus things were and are. It's the Lyceum, it's the central part of campus. This is where people tailgate at sporting events. And we wanted to make sure that we put our bus route and our parking on the perimeter of that pedestrian priority zone. We have not pulled the trigger on that in its entirety. We've reduced the amount of traffic, but we haven't gone full-blown pedestrian at this point. On top of that, and allied to it, was if we're going to ask people to walk, and if we're going to ask people to use bicycles, we all know what it's like in Mississippi in July and August. And so can we concentrate on deliberately planning shaded walkways for people to get where they need to go? And so we evaluated where we should be planting. We've got a very energetic Department of Landscape Services that plant, I think, something on average of about 2 to 3 trees a day. Whenever we build a building and we take a tree down, it's a big emotional experience for everybody, because you see something that's mature, something that's tens, maybe even 100 years old. But when you plant a tree, there's no visual impact because it's 2, 3, 4 feet high and nobody really sees it. So taking trees down has been something that's an emotional experience, and we have to do it sometimes. But planting is something that we've continued to do. This was our, as the slide says, it's an extremely integrated transportation planning. Used to be that we found a crepe myrtle and we chained a bike to it, and so far so good. And then we thought, well, perhaps we can do a little better than that. And so we wanted to encourage bicycles on campus, and so we started to do a little better than that. And our proposed bicycle framework started to see that the students would gravitate with their bicycles as close to the classroom building that they were going to be in as possible. And they would chain their bikes to the rails on the front door if they could. So rather try to help them, find ways for them to be able to do what they need to do and get where they need to go. We started to develop our transportation system, our public transportation system, with the OUT, Oxford University Transit. Today, we now have 11 buses running around campus simultaneously. And I should say that we experienced a pretty significant population rise up until about 2-3 years ago in terms of our students. We went from like 8,000 students, 12,000 students, 15, and we got up to 20. And the charge that now we've gone down just a little bit over the last couple of years, and then even more so with COVID. But the charge from the administration to me was, not that we're going to do it right now, but can you come up with a master plan that will enable us to go from 20 to 25,000 students and from 25 to 30,000 students? So clearly, bus transit was going to be an important ingredient here. And at that time, you know, I was listening to people telling me how we had such a terrible parking problem on campus. So I went out one afternoon and see if I could find where that parking problem was. Here's where it wasn't, which was that we had these parking lots on the perimeter of campus that nobody would use. And the reason that they wouldn't use them was there was no support system. And so everyone was driving around in the center of campus just waiting for a space to become available, clogging everything up, getting frustrated. And what we realized was that it was the necessity of helping them with a secondary transportation system to add to their personal vehicle once they got on campus. This is where it went several years after that. This was very heartening. We started to see bus shelters, help for people, support services, places to put bicycles, places to jump on buses, jump off buses, places to feel secure, knowing that the bus is going to come and that you're not going to be stranded, especially when it gets dark and you get life safety issues. I put this slide in for the bottom line, literally the bottom line, which shows where we were in 2013 and where we were 5 years later. And that's continued to grow. It's gone down a little bit once we got to 2018, 2019, but this slide shows the sort of the meteoric rise of the transportation system, led by international students, actually. You could see in the early days that the people that knew and had grown up in cities in other parts of the world already were savvy about how to use buses, and their influence has really helped. And even today, our bus service is extremely popular. I will make an excuse for this slide. I had to manipulate my PowerPoint into the rectangular version, and I lost a couple of parking structures on my slide as I did that. But what you can start to see now is that we started out with that very small pedestrian core, which was in here, where it was shaded in blue earlier on in the slide presentation this morning. The second master plan that we did expanded it, and we've now taken it out to this much larger, what we call it an outer ring road. We've got the inner ring road and the outer ring road now. And so like pearls on a necklace, we're starting to distribute our multi-level parking structures on that outer ring road. So we have one here that's connected to the basketball facility. We've got another one that's just off slide, connected to our housing on the north side of campus, and we have others ready to implement. There's the one that sits next to our basketball pavilion. That's about an 850 parking space that we built with the pavilion, and that's right in the heart of campus, but nevertheless still on that outer ring road at its most central point. And there's our second attempt, which I think is an improvement. We've learned as we've gone along, as we do. And we found that when we were master planning the site, if we can find sloping ground that is appropriate in terms of the master plan to site a parking structure, what you can do is load and unload from 2 or 3 different levels. And that helps with getting cars in and getting cars out. And so you can see how we've taken advantage of the slope on this one. And this is adjacent to our housing facilities, and this one holds 1,500 cars. So we've now stacked 1,500 cars in a much smaller footprint than we were doing with our traditional flat parking lots. And so there's the 3-dimensional view of our integrated transportation with the outer ring road. And I draw attention to this red line here, which we'll talk about in a second, which is our connection from the Grove to the football stadium, which is critical. And we'll talk about the law school. And while you can see it in this view, it's affectionately, I call it affectionately, nobody else seems to have called it anything, but I think it's the lobster. I love it. It looks just like a lobster laying there, but it's laying there in a very specific place because the 2 wings of the law school actually center on what was our old basketball arena called the Tad Smith Coliseum. We'll talk about that in just a second. We do continue to plan, and in key places, we come back in and we are fortunate enough to be able to plant large trees. This is a west-facing wall on the basketball pavilion. Gets very hot. I hope 10 years from now, those trees will enable it to be shaded throughout the summer months. So, moving on from transportation, we're still developing our transportation system. Things that we thought we knew. It kind of makes me chuckle because you're only supposed to make a mistake once, and then you're supposed to learn from it. And what we have struggled with is the fact that we live on campus in a place that has some of the most erodible soils on the face of the planet. And so the old view of the architect, and I've always loved this cartoon from a long time ago, and you're implicated as well, by the way, as being part of the team. So it's not just the architect that's gobbling up all this countryside. It's civil engineers as well, and so we're all part of the same team. But that was the way that we used to do things, and the urban sprawl, etc., etc. And so, trying to learn from that, what we did was we sort of forgot where we were in the world, and we've had some situations on campus where these kinds of things have happened, which is we start to disturb the soil, we start to build on it, we start to remove some of the vegetation that's had its roots holding the soil together. And then before we know it, nature comes in, dumps 5 inches of rain or more, and we know what the force of water can do, given enough time. And then overnight, all of a sudden, half a dozen trees fall down and take out a sanitary sewer, almost. Had it not been for the guys in our physical plant department coming in with a fairly ingenious support system to get us over the weekend, we might have lost. This actually went down on a Friday night right behind the new baseball stadium that we were building. A large rain almost pulled the sewer apart with it, and an old sewer at that. We got away with it, and we went back and we scratched our heads and said, okay, well, what are we going to do about soil erosion? And then how are we going to handle water on campus generally? The traditional way of doing it is to move it inside a large pipe. And I'm not suggesting that we won't do that anymore, but are there ways that we can challenge ourselves to bring the water on the surface, to allow it to flow through areas where there may be naturally occurring plants from this area, from the North Mississippi area? We have a lot of planting on campus, which is very popular, azaleas, etc., etc., but they're not native. And they're actually on life support, basically, because they rely entirely on irrigation systems. And so what happened here is this whole parking lot collapsed. And the reason it collapsed was because, this is the rebuild, is that what we didn't know was that the joints, and you all know this better than I do, and I'm learning as we go along. And what we've got to do a better job at the University of Mississippi is really just making sure that we have better quality control on the way that we join our pipes together. We've had 3 or 4 fairly catastrophic situations where pipes have not been joined correctly. Holes have been covered, work has been covered up without adequate inspections and testing. And then over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, water has been leaking through those joints and then eroding the soil around it. And then before you know it, you've got a sinkhole occurring, and then you're back in and tearing everything apart and starting from scratch again with your storm drains. This one was a little different. This one, unbeknownst to us, was an old galvanized pipe, about the same diameter as the one you see here. And yet, over the years, several mechanical systems have been connected to it, and it was running condensate through it every day throughout the summer for 20, 30 years. until the point where those pipes failed. They rusted and failed from the inside. And then the water got outside of the pipe and the erosion occurred, the parking lot collapsed, and we're back to square one, rebuilding. This is the situation. This is the. I'll give you the second slide so you've got the context too. This is our basketball facility, completed in 2016. If you would look at the top left-hand side of the slide, you'll see the football stadium in the background, and you'll see about a 30-foot cast-in-place concrete retaining wall, which is the back side of the basketball facility, and the concept for it. Designed by AECOM, and I understand there may be a representative from AECOM with us this morning. The concept that our athletic director wanted was to be able to have the drama of walking into a facility at grade and then being able to have the view down to the court floor below. Well, what that did was that put us 30 feet below grade to begin with, and then with using a system of auger cast piles, which were themselves almost 60 feet long. That puts you 90 feet below grade. And we knew that underneath this particular site right here at about 120 feet below grade was the largest and the most productive aquifer in the region. And so we knew we had to be very, very careful. And I was very concerned that we didn't get into that aquifer and contaminate anything, because that's where lots of wells and lots of fresh water is taken in this region. And the other thing that I was aware of, I don't know how many of you know the Clemson area and Lake Hartwell. When you've got a lake next to a university and you have a drought, people know there's a drought because the lake goes down and they see it and they worry about it. We don't know what's happening in our aquifer because we don't see it. So we're a university town like Clemson, but we don't see our water source. So we've got to be very careful and very aware of it. And that's how it finished up. That retaining wall is behind you on that back wall, a little bit further back. But the drama did play out. And this photograph was taken just a couple of days ago. And you can see after 4 years how well the athletic department has looked after this facility. And they love it. Conversely, on the football practice field, 4 years after we built the practice facility, we actually we undermined our own practice field, much to the chagrin of this gentleman who was wondering how practice is going to happen tomorrow. Facilities planning came in. We had help, of course, with our civil engineering firm. We said we're going to have to take out everything that's in green, marked by this red line. They said, do we have to? We said, afraid so. Practice had to go elsewhere. And by the time we finished a week later, this is what we had managed to do with it. And we don't want to have to keep going back and redo. And that's where we've got to do better in terms of our quality control. And that's what we're working on at the moment in terms of our civil engineering. One of the successes, they're the failures, by the way, just to separate the failures from the successes. This is, I think, my favorite building on campus. And this is the medicinal plant garden. It's only about 10,000 square feet. It's great from a sustainability point of view. It's a LEED Silver building. It uses the plants that the academics, the professors in the medicinal plant garden use for their experiments. So they're actually building their own solar shade. If you can see on the left side of this split, this is actually a split slide. So they make their own sun shading device, which I love that notion. And it goes away in the winter because these plants die because they're annuals. Basically, they're in pots, big pots. And then the winter sunlight comes through and warms the interior of the space. They also have a 20,000 gallon tank that takes all the water off the roof, which they use to irrigate their plants. So this building and the function and the methods using is all tied together, and that's why we're building. We are aware of where the sun is, and we're aware of how the sun can help us, and we're aware, we think, of how the sun can harm us. So we try to be careful in an environment where, frankly, people try to say we'd like our buildings to have columns on them. We'd like them to look like they were built in the 1700s. I'm not sure that I go with that when we're challenging science and we're trying to do cutting edge research. The idea of doing cutting edge research in a building that's new, that looks like it was 300 years old, is a little strange to me. So I've always pushed back a little bit on that. But I do understand my context, and I do understand the sensitivity of a lot of people at the university to the history of the campus, and I do take the history seriously. There's an interpretation of a building, the new law school building, which we did go with a neoclassical building, and I think that's been very successful, and I think the law school people enjoy it very much. The soil erosion when we built this was so difficult to deal with. We have a neighbor to the west of us who has a lake, and we just found it so difficult to keep the silt out of their lake while we were in construction. And that was a huge challenge. The interior of the building, this was a LEED Gold building. This was a successful building, I think, from an environmental point of view, but also from an interior point of view in terms of the experience for the law students. I can't put this slide up without smiling, I didn't even notice the waste paper bin, and I didn't move it, and I've regretted it ever since I took the photograph. There it is. If you can't see it, it's a mistake, it's a failure, I feel terrible. But joking apart, it's a pretty neat space, and if you can't study in that space, I don't think you can study there. So we're very pleased with the way it works. We bought a building that used to make washing machines, and this is the old Whirlpool plant, and that's the artist's rendering of the Whirlpool plant. It's across Highway 6, and there's the artist's impression, and that's how it turned out. So we're very pleased with that, because this is basically a recycled building, and to take a building like that and to turn it into something now artist's impression of the cardiovascular space, that's how it turned out. The lights that you see in the right-hand corner,
So our job is to
I don't know who's not muted. If you could all just check that you're muted, I'd appreciate that. Otherwise, I will just soldier on. There we go. Thanks, guys. The interior space turned out pretty well. These lights that you see on the top right are light scoops. That is daylight. That is sunlight harvesting that you see there on on those lights. Something that we are proud of. The only thing we've got to do now is to figure out how we can get the people to turn the electric lights off when we're generating enough light naturally. We have a habit of having both of them on at the same time, which defeats the object of doing it. But again, a repurposed building from an old warehouse to a South Campus recreational facility. Oh, and they're north-facing windows, by the way, hugely valuable. They do tend to lose a lot of heat in the winter, but we are in Mississippi, so over the course of the year, the money saved by not lighting it with electric light is greater than the cost of heating it in the winter. And basketball facilities and tracks, and don't we wish we had facilities like this when we were in university. So where are we going from here? We are going to work on that outer ring road. We're going to continue to work on our transportation policy. You can see there on the slide, there's 1, 2, moving around counterclockwise, there it goes again, 3, 4, 5, 6 multi-level parking structures located around that ring road, and so continue in our quest for decentralization with our parking, and trying to get people around campus, which isn't that big. It's really only a 10-minute walk from anywhere to anywhere on campus, and many walks are much less than that. We had an old basketball facility, as you can see right in the center of the slide. The Tad Smith Coliseum was our basketball arena. I don't know when we're going to take it down. We always say we will, but it's been 4 years and we still haven't done that. But it sits in a circle right there. You can just see where my cursor is. If you can see the arrow, that's the circle where the tab pad is at the moment. The gun sights from the Lobster are really, this was not an accident, I have to say. We noticed this way back in 2007, 2008, that if we could set the stage with the layout of the Robert Kayat Law Center, take out the Coliseum, turn the Coliseum into the Tad Smith Coliseum into a circle. It's not quite, but it's very close to the same diameter as the circle outside the Lyceum, which is already filled when we do game day anyway. So we do what the Olmsted brothers taught us to do, which is to make the university a space-driven organization. So we are driven by outdoor spaces, and so there it is. Now we have these academic spaces that surround that open space and define that open space. We've got almost 100,000 square feet of useful space right here, and I beg your pardon, almost 1 million square feet of academic space in this whole area, taking us from over 7 to over 8 million. So I think a good move, and it may not be that we see this in my time here, but there's the artist's impression. This one suffered a little bit. I apologize for that when we reoriented the PowerPoint proportions, but I think that will be a very dynamic space, and I think that if we can pull that off, I hope it will add to the campus. And then I mentioned this, put this slide back in to draw attention to that red line there, because that's, and there, by the way, is there's the circle today, and there is where the Coliseum is today. You can see it's a little bit smaller, but working along the same architectural planning principles. How do we join the Grove to the football stadium? Well, maybe like this. That line, the football stadium's to your left, and the Grove is to your right. Facilities planning just designed in our little office. We just designed this building here, this bell tower. It's now complete. The science building that you see in the center of the slide is not. We're ready to do that. We're really excited about that building. That building is an environmental machine in terms of its ability to shade the sun, to accept the sun when it's beneficial. The interior of it, which I'll show you in a second, is I think is very powerful. But more than anything, the drainage and the garden and the landscape work down through here, working with a firm called Andropogan out of Massachusetts. This will become a Faulkner garden. This is where we've got scientists coming out here. We have a combination of game day spirit through here, because this is the Walk of Champions from the Student Union all the way into the stadium. So this space, I hope 15, 20 years from now, will really be iconic in terms of bringing scientists, game day people, a linear park, almost like the High Line in New York City. These, I asked the architects to render these trees as they would be after 2 years, but maybe after 10, 15, 20 years, there'll be a significant shaded area in this space. And I hope this space turns out as we hope it will. We, by the way, make pedestrians dominant here. The pedestrian has the right of way, and the vehicle has to wait. And so, because this is in the heart of campus, this is a pedestrian dominant zone, and buses, of course, can traverse this road as well. There's the interior of the science building, pretty dramatic. We're talking a little bit about in the introduction. It sounded really boring to me, the introduction about what I've devoted my life to, which is stack effect ventilation.
Okay.
But this does indeed generate over the 4 stories. When the outdoor conditions are correct, you get a pretty good buoyancy effect in this space. And when you've got humidity, you shut the building up, and you have to rely on mechanical means. There is the Walk of Champions going down towards the football stadium. There's a Faulkner chimney that used to exist right here. This is an interpretation of that chimney where Faulkner used to work in the old power plant that was right on that space there. So we designed a chimney that was an interpretation of, not a chimney, but it is an interpretation of a chimney. It's a piece of public art. They are large steel plates, which are in fact pages from Faulkner's books. And so this is the Faulkner garden, and all the plants in this garden are plants that have occurred and been mentioned in Faulkner's novels. So they are all native plants to Mississippi. Water management, again, coming down from the top of the slide on the right all the way down through, working with landscape architects and civil engineers to hopefully not make any of the mistakes that we've made in the past. Other areas of campus that we've got planned for the future are on the exterior. This is a student services building where parents will come to be able to orientation and to understand a little bit more about the campus. They will have a tower so they can actually get an aerial view without driving around. And that is the Magnolia Plaza. Right back at the beginning of the presentation, I showed you those magnolia trees that had just been planted. They are magnificent. The center of this slide is currently a parking lot, and we would like to give that parking lot back to the people to engage as they wish outside. And we do that not by punitive means of making people park in places that are difficult to get into, but into some of those multi-level parking structures that are relatively close to the public transportation system. Closing, you know, I think sometimes you've got to laugh, and this is this is not on our campus, but I love it. It's relatively close to where I live. It's a redo. This particular piece of outdoor ground takes a lot of rainwater, as you can see, and it fell apart about 3 months ago and was rebuilt. It did not see a civil engineer of any description. I don't know who designed it. I do know the concrete. I did actually. I am so bizarre when I'm out walking the dog. I actually measure the width of concrete. There's not a single piece of this concrete that's thicker than 2 inches. And when it broke, the kids in the neighborhood came and flipped it and turned it up, and it's now become a piece of public art. And so, the moral of that story is that you read it, but that's if that's 3 months and it's already gone, would somebody please call a civil engineer, because we need help. But I do want to stress that is not on our campus. And that's it from me. Thanks for your attention. It was a real privilege to be able to speak this morning, and I hope you can tell that I enjoy what I do. And for whatever time Jennifer has left for us, I'd be more than happy to try and answer some questions.
Thanks, Ian. And we do have about 5 minutes for questions if anybody has any. You can put them in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself to ask. I like how you, at the end, you said, this is not on our campus.
I don't want to make it sound like we don't we don't make mistakes. I've shown some of our mistakes. We make them every day, and if you're not doing anything, you won't make mistakes. So, but this just wasn't one of them.
We have a question from Chris. What are the plans for green infrastructure for stormwater management?
Yeah, that's the question that I put I highlighted it in red because we found it difficult to get traction. One of the things that I tried to do when we were working on our sewage treatment facility was to take the water that had been treated from, this is not stormwater, but this is connected to Chris's question. I wanted to take the outflow from the finished product and bring it back onto campus and use it to irrigate. And I came up against, and I did give up, and that's a terrible thing to say, but when sometimes we're under a lot of pressure in what we do, and sometimes we have pressure from money and budgets and all that kind of stuff and schedules, and we haven't cracked that yet, and there's a lot of wastewater, condensate water that goes into storm drains, that erodes pipes that we have to replace. And we've got to do better with that. And so when it comes to stormwater management, I would like to see us work harder. And it's application, Chris. It's finding the drive to be able to stay later, work harder, apply yourself harder, and not give up. And that's what I think leadership from where the buck stops in this office, at least, is to make a nuisance of myself to everybody at the university and say, no, that is not good enough. And if we think it's good enough, then it probably isn't. So we've got lots of work to do on stormwater, and my goal would be to make it visually attractive, which means bringing it out of pipes, taking it into rain gardens. We have a rain garden project which is actually being driven by a student. As Jennifer said at the beginning, I am the director of the Office of Sustainability as well, which is allied, and it's in the same building as facilities planning. What we have got to do is apply ourselves, and by golly, start seeing some of these rain gardens actually built. We know how to do it. Chris, we know how to do it. I think if that question is from Chris Surbeck, I think that we just need to all work together and push a little harder. And I think that's a simple answer to a very good question, but it's not that we can't do it, it's just that we haven't done it.
Yes, Ian, that was me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Matthew asked, did you say the foundations of the new basketball stadium were drilled shaft crushed aggregate piles?
No, I said they were cast auger piles.
Cast auger.
Yeah.
A little lost in translation.
Auger cast. Sorry, I may have said it backwards, but yeah, auger cast, and somewhere around about between 55 and 60 feet.
Okay, and then our last question is from Vince. Are there water sampling wells on campus to ensure the aquifer is not impacted?
That is a question that I can't say yes or no. And I'll explain why I'm trying to skirt around the question and get out of here before I have to say I don't know. I work closely with our Office of Facilities Management that used to be called Physical Plant. There is a gentleman in Physical Plant, David Atkinson, who is extremely knowledgeable in that area. And David is responsible for all of our wells and possible water on campus. So I will be more than happy to put that question to him afterwards and send you an answer in writing if that's okay. Jennifer, can we get? Did you say that was Matthew?
That was Vince.
Vince, I beg your pardon. Can we get Vince's email address and answer that question for him in writing?
Yeah, I am happy to. I will send that to you in an email.
Great. Thank you, Vince. That's a good question, and it's just outside of my area of expertise. I apologise for not being able to answer it.
Well, thanks, Ian, and thank you, everybody, for the questions. This concludes this presentation, and our next presentation will begin in approximately 10 minutes at 9:10 a.m. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.